Chapter 34. During her elevator ride down from the VIP floor, Kayla adjusted her sarong. Her brown tails were still coiled and tied by her hips, but the knot holding the black transparent swath of fabric had come loose when she fully freed her black tail. She couldn't get it to layer correctly. The patch of black fur covering her pelvic region was shaped enough like a thong that she hadn't felt a need to cover up with real underwear. She was more concerned with the thickness of the fabric behind her than in front. The spot where it had been tied and knotted around her tails before had been sufficient, but she was unable to replicate the effect without help. Her ass was at least covered, even if it was nearly visible through the sheer garment. It felt nice to let at least one tail hang free, even if she did have to wrap it around her waist just far enough to keep it from dragging on the floor behind her. The tails of canine species tended to hang to around knee length. The felines had longer tails, ending near their ankles. The reptilian species with tails all had their own length issues, but Kayla's tails were still longer, and much more likely to be stepped on than tripped over. The likelihood of someone stepping on just the right point along the length of her black tail was extremely slim, but why take the chance? Some Cheshire wear jewelry on their tails. Maybe the Terran-sized Karzan at the bar could give her useful advice. Kayla smiled to herself as she stepped off the elevator, happy to have a conversation starter. Before passing under the balcony, she noticed the lights were now on inside the watchtower high above the dance floor. As she passed down the ramp toward the bar and dance floor, it occurred to her how difficult it could be to have a conversation while sitting at the bar. This was the first club she'd ever gone to, so she wasn't sure how to conduct conversations. Should she wait for a quieter song? Do you just stand near them and scream, and hope they can understand you? Some of the customers were moving their hands while speaking. Is lip reading or some secret hand signals a normal practice? Maybe she should find a way to coax them over to one of the tables out beyond the bar area. Here's an idea, Kivaza mocked her from within. Stop panicking, walk up to the bar and observe the people there, then act accordingly. Kayla spun to her right with her right hand clenched, her arm drawn back ready to strike. A grinning Udbar had taken advantage of her moment of distraction to cup her left butt cheek. Beyond the man, through the crowd, she could see light reflecting in the eyes of some furry creature standing on all fours, watching her. She took a half step to the side so the man was blocking Fadil's view of her black tail, angling her stinger towards his throat. She withdrew her stinger and lowered her tail as the Udbar backed away from her with his hands held up in front of him. Kayla smiled, and waved at the wolf-like guard, to make sure he knew she was aware he was keeping an eye on her. Kayla turned back to face the end of the bar where the two pygmy Karzan had been sitting and continued walking. 4 steps later, she stopped dead in her tracks. Everything suddenly sounded strange, muffled, and distorted. After pausing to look around, she realized she could hear the sound of the taking orders, and the conversations of people nearby. The music sounded incredibly quiet with other sounds blending in with it. She stepped back and the background ambient volume returned to normal. Kayla looked down and noticed a broad band of metal embedded in the floor, a uniform 10 feet from the bar. She stood directly on top of the band and leaned backward and forwards, amusing herself with the difference the sound dampening barrier made. Kayla tried to hide her embarrassment as a few clubgoers who had seen what she was doing laughed. "Hey, Fox Lady," a voice spoke directly into her mind. With the knack suppression field in operation, they would have to be a naturally telepathic species. They'd need a direct line of sight. It was most likely a Darien, but she didn't see one by the bar. Kayla ignored them and kept walking. "What do we have here?" a Shamfarian wearing a flight suit said as she sat down on a stool between him and the pygmy. Kayla looked straight forward. Under normal circumstances, her psionic abilities would give her a big impression of the emotional state of people nearby. She couldn't sense the feline's thoughts or mood. She had become far too dependent on her knacks and felt anxious without them. "Where did your friend go?" Kayla asked, turning her head toward the Karzan on her right. My buddies are around here somewhere, the Shamfarian on her left said. How about you take off that mask so I can get a better look at you? Kayla turned to face the Shamfarian. I wasn't talking to you. What's your problem? I just wanted to talk. Maybe show you a good time. You don't have to be a bitch, the Shamfarian snarled. Kayla stroked the top of her communicator and opened a direct channel to the Regicide 1 and activated voice-to-text mode. Hey Tyrell, can you hack the orbital defense grid? I'm sitting here with some dumbass wearing a flight suit with the word Atraxia 972 on it. Is that a ship name? Tyrell sent a response message. He couldn't breach defense grid security, but he let her know that the Atraxia 972 was a registered salvage ship with a 10-man crew. The Shamfarian smirked at her. Yeah, right. I'm so scared. Learn to bluff. Stupid bitch. I don't like being called a bitch by some idiot who's upset that I have no to climb on his. Oh, and he thinks I'm bluffing. Buy it and fire the crew, blow it up, whatever you want. I really don't care what. Just give me a reason to smile. Tyrell's recommendation was to send a message using her ID insisting Gao Rune cancel their salvage license for this region of space. Still going to pretend you're more than just some dumb slut, the Shamfarian balked. Give it up, lady. You're not worth my time. Kayla grinned. Sounds good, but I want some instant gratification. Tell him I want that ship gone. I want them to gather up their crew and vacate the system immediately. He picked up his drink, scoffed, and started walking away. As he was about to leave the noise suppression field, she heard a beep. After he'd checked the message that he'd received on his tablet and glared at her, Kayla smiled and waved at him. Tyrell sent her another message. I don't know who the fuck you think you are, lady, the Shamfarian yelled as he advanced on her position. She could see Faddle speeding through the club toward the bar. Me, Kayla said with a vicious grin. I'm Lady fucking Darkseid. One more insult and I'll reconsider my decision to show mercy. You call this mercy, he yelled as he attempted to rush her. She struggled to not giggle as Faddle stood up behind the man, placed his clawed hand on the man's shoulder, and growled, walk. She had someone blow up my fucking ship, he yelled while struggling against Faddle's grasp. Wait, what? Kayla was shocked. That's not right. Kayla opened the message from Tyrell, which confirmed the destruction of the Atraxia 972. Two more Myco stepped into the bar area and started to approach. Faddle, Kayla said. If you're interested in making up for your manager's drink debacle, I have a special request. Blowing up my ship wasn't enough for you, the Shamfarian looked terrified. Faddle tilted his head to one side. I didn't order the destruction of his ship, Kayla sighed. It's going to take some time. Is there someplace you can have him confined while I sort things out? Faddle barked orders to the other two guards. Kayla smiled as Faddle walked over to her and the Shamfarian was led away. He shouldn't have provoked me, she shrugged. All this mess because he was upset that I'd rather talk to this pygmy Karzan than him. When did you talk to me? The feline looked confused. I tried asking where your friend went. I was hoping to ask if she could give me some tail jewelry advice, Kayla said as she waved her black tail between them. Faddle growled deep in his chest and kept walking past them. I'll find you when I'm ready to deal with that Terran. The massive wolf turned his head, nodded, and walked away. Kayla stroked her communicator, told Tyrell she'd talk with him later, then switched it back to thought to text and reconnected with her local chat group. All this over wanting to accessorize, the Karzan snickered. There was a quiet rumbling quality to his voice. Kayla refocused her eyes. She could see patterns on the floor outlining the tables behind the bar area that matched the glow of the floor inlay around the bar. She returned to normal vision. I could really use a drink after that. Would you mind if I buy you a drink, and maybe we can find a place to talk before some other idiot decides I'm obligated to entertain their advances? In the face, he resembled a lynx rather than one of the larger feline species. Small tufts of hair extended from the tip of each of his ears. His fur was a blend of browns and whites, with black spots on his upper arms and chest. The fur near the ends of his fingers was white. His nose didn't protrude nearly as far from his face as the canine snouts do. His eyes were yellow, and his tail hung down to almost ankle length. It was brown except the last third, which had more of a reddish hue. His fur was longer around his shoulders, tapering in a wedge shape down his chest. If she were to squint and look at him straight on, he'd look like a Terran wearing a fur coat, except for his ears. I don't currently have a ship in orbit, he teased, so sure. I don't see any harm in letting you keep me company, at least until my sister gets back. I'll just let her know where to find me when she does. He tapped the nose of her mask. I'll just tell her in sitting with a girl with a dog's face. You can call me Callie, Kayla said. Miyako. He more purred his name than spoke it. Once they both had their drinks, they headed over to find a table. He was slightly taller than her, even without the addition of his pointed ears. He was wearing a pair of goggles perched upon his head, and a garment around his waist that was somewhere between a loincloth and an armored skirt with pockets. The advantage of long, thick fur was the social acceptance of clothing that only covered the reproductive bits. Interestingly enough, the acceptance of wearing almost nothing led to most bestial counter-hominids wearing more, not less. Miyako had opted for less. The angle of his legs and feet were very different from her own, and different from the canine species as well. It was no wonder Talshi had to lift Cyan slightly to get her into position and make entry possible. Kayla was thankful the position of her mask hid the redness of her cheeks. She wasn't particularly attracted to or aroused by the feline, even if she had appreciated his graceful movements. She was just feeling amorous in general, and had been for hours. She was grateful the idea of tail covering had crossed her mind earlier, otherwise she might have opened with something dreadfully intrusive. The square metal strip around the table was narrower than the bands surrounding the bar, and seemed to function a little differently. It was more difficult to discern what people on the other side of the dampener were saying, but the music sounded softer while retaining its clarity. I may not be as smooth as Baron Deloric, but even I know better than to call a who a what, Miyako snickered softly, but I have to ask, why are you wearing a mask? I came here with two friends, a Kaimanan and Arum. They thought it would be fun if I blended in. My pilot even has a similar look, too, Kayla said. There might be a little more to it, but that's not important right now. Miyako leaned forward with his elbows on the table and his hands on each other under his chin. You said it's not important now? Was it important earlier, or will it become important later? Both, I guess, Kayla said hesitantly. The security staff seemed to think it was important a while ago. That's why they have some of the guards keeping an eye on me. His tail swished back and forth, like a pendulum as he said, really, did something happen? Let's just say. I had an issue with their music selection. Kayla fully unwrapped her black tail from around her hips, raised it up, and coiled it, snake-like on top of the rounded wooden table between them. Yours is bigger than mine, Miyako laughed. Is it fully prehensile? I don't have that sort of control with mine. Can you pick up objects with it? He was maneuvering one of his fingers in front of her tail, watching it track his movements. The stinger kept extending and retracting as his hand moved toward or away from it. Control, not really, Kayla snickered. It cooperates when it wants to, so watch your hand. I actually have 3 tails. I have the other 2 bound by my hips. There have been a few times this one has settled slap fights between the other 2 by threatening to sting them. You're serious, Miyako chuckled. Kayla smiled. I'd probably find it funny too if they weren't attached to me. I've met a few Terrans with tail augments before. This little guy. Girl, Miyako suddenly seemed to realize he was assigning a gender to part of her body. I've never seen a tail this nimble before. It's pretty fast too, but I think I'm. She yelped as he grabbed her tail just far enough from the end that it couldn't sting him. That proves it. He grinned. I am faster. Kayla sucked in her lips, holding them between her teeth, breathing through her nose in a slow, controlled fashion as her tail squirmed, desperately, trying to sting him. Her twin tails writhed, trying to free themselves from their bindings. Of all the places he could have grabbed onto it. He was transfixed on the motion of her black tail, trying not to be stung. He hadn't seen the expression on her face, and clearly had no idea why her tail was going berserk. Kayla was a little worried about what noise might pass her lips if she weren't holding them shut. The pressure wouldn't be at all problematic if she could just convince her tail to stop moving. He clearly had some sort of natural combat empathy based on his ability to avoid being stung, so grabbing his hand aggressively would elicit an instinctive response. Kayla reached out and gently rested her hand on his upper arm, waited for him to look her in the face, and shook her head. I'm trying to let go, he said. I just don't want to get stung. I really didn't think this out. I wanted to see if I could grab it. It reminds me of the first time I grabbed a snake by the tail. Wait, is this poisonous? Kayla shook her head emphatically, as her eyes started watering from the effort of keeping her tail from constricting and possibly injuring him. Okay, on 3, he said. 1. 2. As Miyako said 3, he leaped back from the table, releasing his grip on her tail as she hopped onto the floor and spun in place, pulling her tail away. They both sighed in relief and laughed uncomfortably. For Kayla, it had been an uncomfortable ache and not at all pleasurable. He didn't seem to have any clue how awkward that had been for her. As long as they put on any music by that one band, Kayla felt confident she didn't have much to worry about. Sorry about that, he chuckled as he sat back down at the table. I won't do that again. My mother teases me all the time, accusing me of having Cheshire moments. Then again my namesake got himself killed by running in without regard for the consequences. Kayla sat back down and took a moment to get comfortable. She rested her tail in her lap, petting its fur gently to soothe it. I was named for Miyako Golden Pad, he chuckled softly. Pygmy Karzan aren't required to participate in the trial of adulthood, but my mother did anyway. She tells the story better than I do. She's not as good a tail spinner as Lorik, and I just don't have a talent for it, but long story short, the Karzan I was named for was noble enough to risk his own life to save the life of another cub from an angry mother Phalanx. My mother always says there's a lesson to be learned from that golden pad cub. Nobility without a worthy cause is a waste. There was no strategic value in his actions. He just threw his life away to save a pretty girl that he had a crush on. Worse yet, she had a crush on Lorik. This was before he was a baron, and before he changed his name to Delorik. Your mother knew Baron Delorik, Kayla was doubtful. It sounded a little boastful. They took their trial together, Miyako said dismissively. It can be verified in the Carmel Planetary Archives. Jerem Firetail is my mother. She always cautions me not to trip on my own tail for the sake of impressing a pretty face. I thought I'd be safe as long as you're wearing that mask, but that stinger has me a bit worried. Kayla felt a bit more at ease. He was clearly a nervous talker. So your name is Miyako Firetail? He nodded proudly. That's my clan name, like yours is Dark Seed. Kayla giggled. Maybe you can introduce me to your mother someday. If his mother really did know Baron Delorik, maybe she'd have some idea what really happened at the Battle of Tetarn, and why Acorn had stood by and done nothing, knowing his second-in-command planned to betray him. Kayla had enough mysteries to deal with, but Baron Delorik had left a good impression, and their refusal not to warn him had infuriated her. Sure, Miyako beamed, but it would have to be later tonight. Tonight, Kayla said with a start. We don't leave our home system often, Miyako said while pointing up toward the watchtower. We have to be careful when we do. Security stuff. I'll have to ask permission to bring you up. Wait, is this strange to you? I don't know much about Terran traditions. I'm not quite Terran, Kayla smiled playfully, and for the record, my tails aren't augmentations. You're not K9 either, Miyako laughed nervously. Definitely not, Kayla grinned. What I am is a bit complicated. Kayla couldn't help but wonder why Syntholo had selected Miyako in particular for her to talk to. Was this some direction from Phantom Hound? Meeting the son of one of Baron Deloric's childhood friends seemed far too coincidental. He had to be up to something. Where did he go after walking out of the room earlier? Faddle was out there somewhere in the club keeping an eye on her. She'd felt like she was being watched for some time. Could be crew members from the destroyed salvage ship, Miyako's white-furred sister, Kayla's friends in the VIP room, whoever is up there with Miyako's mother in the watchtower, or... She paused as she glanced around the room. Miyako, Kayla said softly. Lady Callie, Miyako responded. I'm wondering if you can explain something to me, Kayla said softly while looking toward one of the balconies. Hey, Kiryu, Kayla transmitted, what balcony number is on the back left side of the main floor? Kiryu, 2. Why? I can try, Miyako said. Why is there someone on balcony 2 watching the table with binoculars? Kayla said out loud while transmitting the question to Kiryu. Miyako fidgeted uncomfortably. Kiryu, it must be the mask. Balcony 2 is where members of a local kink club hang out. I don't know, he said so quietly she could barely hear him. I've met the Baron, Kayla said as she stared at Miyako while pointing at her ear. I'd like to talk to your mother about him, but I also want you to answer me honestly. I'm in a group conversation with a friend in my VIP room. If you don't answer my question, she will. Who is up on balcony 2, and why are they watching our table? Kiryu, what's going on? I'll get back to you, Kayla transmitted. I think I should go, Miyako said while staring at the floor. I think you should stay, Kayla insisted after a subtle push from her sister self. Miyako took off his goggles and held them out toward her. They should get a pair of these. There were small dials built into the sides of the goggles. Kayla took off her mask, rested it on the table, and looked through the rectangular glass while fidgeting with the dials. They were discreet binocular goggles, with impressive magnification. Kayla looked up at the balcony and saw a Greyford Cayman looking back at her through a pair of binoculars. She could see several other people standing near the edge of the balcony. Some were Terrans, mostly Shamfarian, and the others were a mix of canine species. From her vantage point, far below the balcony, it was difficult to tell what was going on up there, but she could see a Shamfarian aggressively petting a Lupian near the edge of the balcony on one side. Tell me what I'm looking at, Kayla said sternly. I'm not sure, you have my goggles, Miyako said falteringly. Some bestial species really like being petted, and some Terrans have a fur fetish. It's not a sex thing. For most people. Kayla handed him back his goggles. What about you? Miyako's tail hung limp behind him. And his ears were out flat to the sides of his head. Kayla pleaded with Kivaza to take control, or at least help, but to no avail. After all that effort trying to get Shinji to be assertive, she was having her own difficulties doing that. It hadn't even occurred to her that the reason she wanted him to act was because she didn't have the nerve to do it herself. She'd managed to take charge in the hot tub. What made that different? Kayla smirked. She could feel Shinji's desire and feel his thoughts. There was no risk of rejection. She glanced back at the balcony. She didn't like being watched, not that there was much to see. You two don't have some weird bet going or something? Kayla asked irritably. Oh, and you didn't answer my question. Nothing like that, Miyako protested. No bet. You have my word. I do like when people pet my fur, but I like it more than I'm supposed to. They were teasing me about it earlier, he said while looking away as if he were pretending to be talking to himself. Then this guy comes over. Tall guy, with black fur. He tells me he thinks I seem like a good guy, then he says he has this friend. So, I went and sat at the bar, right where he told me to, and waited. Next thing I know, this girl wearing a black and gold mask, like he described, sits next to me, you know the rest. Syntholo, Kayla smirked. I didn't ask his name, Miyako admitted, finally turning back to face her. There was a deep sorrow in his eyes. He didn't tell me that you're pretty. Kayla smirked. Of course, he didn't. He doesn't look at me that way. She immediately felt guilty for completely ignoring the compliment. How about we finish our drinks and dance? You can dance, can't you? Miyako nodded enthusiastically. Kayla sighed. We're still being watched. She picked up her mask and put it back on. Let's move to another table. The ones by the back wall have booths and chairs. It should be harder to see us there. Kayla got up, took his hand and led him to a booth near the back wall. She blushed as her tail reached over and wrapped around his as they walked. She could feel Kivaza giggling at the back of her mind. Holding tails had clearly been her idea. She let go of his tail once they made it to a booth. The booth they selected was built to accommodate species classified as size 2, like full-size Karzan and Gorgalians. They adjusted the chairs opposite from the booths so the back of the seats would hide them from the gray caiman's view as much as possible. They had to position their drinks at the edge of the table so they could reach them. She felt tiny sitting in the large, curved, booth. Kayla took off her mask and laid it on the table between their glasses. If your sister comes looking for you, that should help. Is this normal for you? Kayla giggled as she kicked her feet. Having to sit in chairs made for people about 3 feet taller than you? It depends on where you go. There are plenty of places that are caiman-sized. Most of the off-world bazaar, all Tail clan communal spires, the factories, and most shipyards. Really? Kayla studied him. I didn't think there were that many pygmy Karzan. Can't the big Karzan run their own ships? They do, Miyako said as he pulled up his legs, turned to face her, and sat with his legs bent with the soles of his feet touching. We traded a forest to the caiman for industrial plants, mostly for shipbuilding, a long time ago. They're too small for regular Karzan, so they've been operated by the Tail clans for generations. That's part of why we're better with our hands than they are. We had to be. My mother says the Tail clans have more agile fingers, more endurance, and are sturdier than normal Karzan, and we owe it all to working in those factories for generations. Just don't tell them that. They're stronger than us, and they think that's all that matters. That's just silly. Kayla smiled. I have 2 adopted sons. They're already bigger than Gorgalians, stronger too, and they're not fully grown yet. My sons aren't better than those Karzan because they're bigger and stronger. It's because they're my sons, and I'm completely biased. What species are they? Shah Galtim. Are they here tonight? He asked excitedly. Nope, Kayla chuckled. It's too warm for them here. They'd get in way too much trouble trying to play tag, and they might mistake the guards for pups. I've never met a Jha Galtim, Miyako said sadly. Are they really that big? I'm a proud mother. I might be exaggerating a little, Kayla laughed. I'm just glad I'm not their real mother. I don't know how big they were when they were born, but... He looked a little uncomfortable as she motioned toward her pelvis. What's wrong? Kayla asked as she pulled her legs up on her left side, with her right heel underneath her butt. I didn't mean to look, he said nervously. Look at what? Kayla smirked as she pulled her drink down off the table. He was getting so flustered just for following the movement of her hands. This would probably be a bad time to mention she wasn't actually wearing underwear. She knew her fur was dense enough that he couldn't have seen anything interesting. Kayla bit her lower lip as she wondered what thought might have provoked that reaction. She had a problem. She was a shy girl who liked shy guys, which meant that unless one of them was willing to say what they wanted. Wait, what did she want? Following her lead, he took a swig from his own glass. She matched his movement for movement as they placed their drinks back on the table. They sat in silence facing each other, neither of them speaking. There were only a couple of inches between her knees and his feet. There was a feeling in the air like each of them wanted to ask the other something, but neither of them seemed to have an inkling what that question was, but the silence was fast becoming uncomfortable. I don't have nipples, Kayla said as Miyako asked, want to feel my fur? What? They both said, then laughed. We're both really bad at this, Miyako chuckled. Yeah, Kayla blushed, really bad. Hey, Miyako, Kayla said meekly. You seem really nice, and I think we could be friends. Miyako frowned and sighed deeply. It's okay, I get it. Can we at least still have that dance? What? Where did that come from? Isn't this the part where you let me down easy? No, Kayla scoffed angrily. This is the part where I admit that I came here tonight to screw around, maybe with a couple of people, and then never see them again. Oh, he said sadly. See, I talk just fine when I'm getting frustrated, Kayla snickered. I'm trying to tell you I think I'd like to see if we could be friends after tonight, whether anything happens or not. Miyako looked bewildered. You just wanted to exchange contact information? Yes, Kayla said, feeling a bit self-conscious as he sat quietly fidgeting with the palm of his hand. Okay, lean forward, and hold still a second, Miyako smiled. A little confused, Kayla leaned forward. He reached forward and held his hand next to her ear. The fur of his wrist felt soft against her cheek and tickled a little. What are you doing? Kayla asked. Trying to transfer my contact information, Miyako said merrily. I've never seen one like yours before, but this usually works. That's not where it stores the information, Kayla blushed as she tapped the pen hanging in the center of her chest. This is. I'd have to hold my hand up to it, he said nervously. Kayla bit her lower lip, smiled playfully, and arched her chest forward. Go ahead. His hand trembled as he reached forward to place his palm against the gemstone pendant. Her communicator interface beeped softly as it contact confirmation request. Just send me back a message after you accept, so I can add you to mine, Miyako said after withdrawing his hand and staring at his palm. There was a faintly glowing ring around the iris of his right eye. That must be where his visual data goes. The data packet didn't come with a name entry, so she had to enter one herself. Kayla looked him up and down while deciding what to call him on her list. She was confused by the look on his face until she remembered the default name setting Cyan had set to her module. She set his name to Cat Fancy, vowing to change it, and her default name, later. Striped Candy, Miyako recited. Yeah, Kayla said meekly, I need to change that. When your friend came up to balcony 2, Miyako began. I had no idea he was doing that, Kayla snickered. He works as a scout for a faction, you'd think he would have said something about it. I only found out about balcony 2 after I saw we were being watched. And I think I just thought of a good way to get back at him. I'm going to make him deal with that guy from earlier. Syntholo, get your fuzzy butt down here. I need to have a word with you, Kayla transmitted. Kiryu, I'll let him know. Callie, Miyako said as he grabbed his drink from the table, I'm comfortable around my people, and people like my people, but I'm nervous around. Well, you said you're not really a Terran, but you look like one. I mean you don't have fur, other than your tail. I was really hoping my sister would get here. She said she'd help me talk to you. I mean she knows. She said she'd stand behind you so I could look at her while talking to you so I wouldn't be as nervous. I don't know if it would really help. But maybe it would. I wish I could just. I'm sorry, am I having another Cheshire moment? I think so, Kayla smiled. Would it be easier for you if I put the mask back on? I don't know, he said as he tilted his glass and took a few quick gulps. I like being able to see when you blush. Are you saying this would be easier for you if I had fur? Maybe. Wait here, Kayla said as she finished off her drink. I have an idea. Promise me you won't go anywhere. I thought we were going to dance after you finished your drink, Miyako said. Kiryu, Syntholo's heading down now. Nelfrey, Kiryu thinks we should go exploring. Are you okay without us, Syntholo? Where do you need me to be? I was about to head back to the bar. Let me just find my observer, and I'll meet you there, Kayla transmitted. Don't worry Nelfrey, I'll be fine for a while. We will, Kayla reassured Miyako, after the next one. I was going to grab something a little stronger. I'll get you a refill too, okay? Sure, Miyako said nervously, it's okay if mine's stronger, too. Kayla got up, put on her mask and started heading to the bar. She kept a careful eye out on any abrupt movements among the club patrons. It didn't take her long to find Fatal stalking after her. She stopped at a table just beyond the bar area and motioned for Fatal and Syntholo to join her. She made arrangements with Fatal for Syntholo to deal with the Terrans she'd asked security to hold on her behalf. Syntholo was directed to coordinate with Tyrell and offer them a replacement ship of comparable value, if they agreed to investigate the area around where the creature that she'd felt die in space had been and report back all their findings. Transference of the ship license would be done upon successful completion of the job to Lady Darkseid's satisfaction. If they didn't accept her offer, no reparations would be provided. If they did accept her conditions, but didn't complete her task, Tyrell could just pull the registration, list the ship as stolen, and post a bounty. Without the need for pricey components like a jump drive, a salvaged ship could be purchased for under 100 gal creds. Most of the value of her own ship, the regicide one, was tied up in her fleet-class Universal Cipher. Before Syntholo left, Kayla had him help her adjust her sarong and unbind her brown tails. You two have fun, Kayla transmitted. Syntholo should be off the air and tied up in negotiations for a while. Kiryu, we will. Kayla coiled one brown tail around each leg and her black tail around her midriff before approaching the bar. Nelfrey, next time, can we go someplace where their hands are bound? I'm going to be busy, Kayla transmitted. If you have any real problems, tell one of the big watchdogs. Nelfrey, at least none of them have tried to touch me. Kiryu, I wouldn't mind if one touched me. Kayla was relieved to be ignored while getting drinks from the bartender. Apparently, a woman wearing a fox mask was much less enticing when it looked like she had a furry stomach and legs. She hurried back toward the booth where she'd left Miyako, hoping he was still there. Halfway to the booth, one of the Miko guards stepped directly in front of her and growled loudly. Their fur was blackish, with a deep gray patch under their chin. I don't speak bestial common, Kayla said apologetically, hoping they could hear her over the music. They leaned back on their haunches, looked to one side, and held up two fingers. Kayla turned her head to follow their gaze. The guard was looking toward the DJ booth. Kayla nodded, mouthed the words thank you, and picked up her pace as she continued on her way. As she neared the table, she saw another Karzon sitting with Miyako. What color was the other Karzon's fur? Kayla transmitted. Kiryu, white, like mine. The current song ended and the next song began to play as she continued to the table. If she understood the guard correctly, the song after this one would be by that band that had affected her tail earlier. She'd have to explain her situation before the current song ended. It was going to be an awkward enough conversation, without having to worry about possibly having to rush back to her VIP room. Was she willing to risk sitting next to him while the nerves in her tail drove her to climax? Would the sound dampening system prevent it from being an issue? Entirely. Did she want it to? Can you two see me from the balcony? Kayla transmitted, Nelfrey, not from this side. Kiryu, is there something worth seeing? Next song there may be, Kayla transmitted. Kiryu, this song's around 5 minutes long. By the time it's over we should be able to do some Kali spotting. Nelfrey, is something wrong? The nerve bundle at the end of my left tail is stimulated by some sound waves, Kayla transmitted. The next song will be interesting. Kiryu, I'll be watching. Of course, you will, Kayla snickered as she walked up to the table and put down the drinks. Miyako's companion had snow-white fur with light gray spots on the top of her head, cheeks, and arms. Her eyes were large and blue. Her face was broader than his, more like a panther. She was wearing a light blue dress and had leather bands around her forearms and flowers braided into her hair. You look pretty, Kayla said. What's wrong with your legs? The white Karzan sneered. Miyako looked appalled at his sister's statement. Kayla crossed her arms and smirked as she unraveled her tails. Miyako said he is more comfortable talking to girls with fur. My tails have fur, and you're in my seat. Not too shy, the white Karzan said while standing up and stepping out of the booth. She looked back at Miyako and said, I approve. Don't screw it up. Kayla fought against her desire to tell the woman exactly where she could put her approval. I'm Tearo, she said with a peculiar look in her eyes, then walked away. What was that all about? Kayla mumbled as she sat down in the booth. I'm not sure, Miyako shrugged. I've never seen her just walk away like that. I thought she was going to help me. I didn't see where she went, Kayla grumbled as she looked around the area. Which one's mine? Miyako said while motioning to the drinks. Kayla's right tail reached up and pulled his drink toward him as her left tail fetched her own. Tails, Kayla giggled as she took her drink from her tail and put it back on the table. Your sister distracted me. I should probably wrap back up so it'll be easier for you to talk. Miyako watched quietly as Kayla scooted forward, held her legs out straight, and slowly coiled her tails around them, starting near her hips and ending at her ankles. Okay, where were we? Kayla said as she maneuvered back into the position she was sitting in earlier. Should I leave the mask on? It's a canine face, I think it will only make things stranger. Your real face is pretty. I think off would be better, but my sister said something, while making fun of me, that might make things easier. What she said was mean, but she doesn't know you have stripes on your cheeks. Kayla took off her mask and handed it off to her black tail which reached up and laid it on the table. What did she say? Kayla asked warily, and why haven't you turned to face me yet? I don't remember how I was sitting before, he said, but there was an eagerness in his tone. The way he sat earlier, his feet were a barrier between them preventing them from moving any closer together. She felt like it was an invitation to ask him to sit however she'd prefer. Kayla smiled surreptitiously as she considered. He seemed more agile than strong. He'd claimed his species was sturdy, despite looking a little frail. Then again, Kayla had a deceptively dense body mass despite her slender frame. The way his arms connected to his torso was the same as her own, so that wasn't a major consideration. His legs weren't so much jointed in one additional spot. It was more that his femur and tibia bones were more equal in length and the hind section of his foot from his ankle spanned a longer distance to his toes which functioned more like a Terran's foot. This adequately compensated for the leg length differential between them. The angles of his legs were a bit different below his pelvic bone which tilted further forward than her own, which was just part of the difference in their tail structure. Hers was mostly cartilaginous. His tail was more of an extension of his spinal column. As Kayla concluded her analysis, she noticed the distressed look in his eyes. Is something bothering you? For a second there you looked like you were thinking about dissecting me. You're supposed to undress them with your eyes, not vivisect them in your head. Kivaza teased from within her. Her sister's self seemed closer to the surface of their shared mind than Kayla had anticipated. Kayla flushed. I was looking to see how you're put together, Kayla tried to say, but she heard herself say, I was looking to see how we'd fit together. Damn it, Kiv, why did you do that? Kayla thought angrily. Just a little push, Kivaza responded within her mind. Miyako was just sitting there blinking, stammering quietly, trying to force his words free from his throat. I haven't even decided if I'd be willing to. Kayla thought to her other self. I know your mind, Kivaza taunted. Figure it out, and keep in mind how Cyan's fingers aren't abnormally long or thick. Decide quick. You're running out of time. The ship couldn't leave without her. Kayla had plenty of time. The finger comment troubled her. She did like Miyako, but how much of her apprehension was based on what she'd been told about the size of a Karzan's? Was that affecting her decision? She was the one who declared she wanted to try something different, and none of her friends had judged her for it. Miyako turned to face her with his knees bent in front of himself and his feet flat on the booth in front of him. Is it weird that I want to try going interspecies? Kayla transmitted. Nelfrey, women usually go through that phase in grad school. Kiryu, I did a Lupian earlier. Worth it. Kayla sighed. If nothing else, she'd done well choosing her friends. He gulped heavily and looked down at his hand. Oh, wait, I forgot, I have a list. My sister helped me make a list of questions to ask you. Kayla scooted forward until her knees were next to his feet, reached up and grabbed her glass off the table. Okay, I'm ready. Go ahead, but I should warn you, the more honest I am, the more I confuse people. What actual species are you? Miyako asked. Do you want to just skip to the next one? Kayla stifled a laugh. I can't really answer that. I've tried before, but it's easier to just say unique. Do you mind if I just say I was made at a cloning facility and skip to the next question? Really? Why did they make you? Kayla shrugged. Did that guy with the black fur bring you here? No, Kayla said, then paused. Well, actually. He flew me to the surface, but I asked him to come to the club with us. One of the women I came with can't dance, and I asked him to keep her company. So, it depends on what you mean by here. Who are you here with? He asked, other than him. Kayla looked across toward the Overwatch balcony, but couldn't tell where her friends were. I thought I told you I came with 2 friends, both girls. Sorry, I forgot. Miyako's right ear twitched. Do you come here a lot? First time, Kayla wondered why he was asking such bland questions. Really? Miyako seemed legitimately surprised. Then why does that security officer seem to know you? That was the first question he'd asked that didn't sound like he was reading it off the list. Unfortunately, the answer was as uninteresting as the question. When I got here, I made security nervous. They were worried I was going to start a fight. He's the one that brought me to the office to sort things out. How often do you do this? How many more questions are on your sister's list? Kayla grumbled. It's my list too, he insisted. Really? Kayla snickered. What does this mean? How often do I do what? I don't know. It doesn't say. Kayla burst out laughing. There's only a few more, Miyako said nervously. Her black tail pushed out over the side of the booth as she pulled down her drink and took a swig. Go ahead and ask, Kayla sighed. Miyako cleared his throat then recited the next question. Karzan society is different than other nations. Our government provides for all of our needs, but individual wealth or possessions are not permitted. Is it a problem that Miyako? I mean, I have no money or possessions other than what the state provides. Really? Kayla tilted her head to the side. I don't believe you. Did your government buy the implant in your hand, and those goggles, and what about the drink you had when I sat at the bar? He looked frightened as he answered. A gift, stolen, and I was drinking water. Really? Kayla cocked an eyebrow. How did you get here, and pay for the watchtower? Stealing from a rival, without being caught, is part of our culture too. We steal from the Tazcore factories where they make us work and sell the goods at the off-world bazaar. It takes around a year for us to charter a ship here and pay for the tower. My mother does it so she can have meetings somewhere secure. They just bring me along when there's enough extra room on the transport. This is only my 4th time here. I stole these goggles from the factory myself. He sounded proud. Kayla frowned. So I'll only have 2 more chances to see you, unless... Why? Miyako sounded distressed. Are you sick? No, Kayla sighed. This planet won't be here in 3 years unless I can find a way to save it. If I can't figure that out in time, or if I wanted to see you sooner, is it possible to pick you up on your homeworld? I'd still need permission to leave, and arrange for someone to cover my shifts at the factory. Do they really force you to work there? Kayla asked in dismay. Don't they give you vacation time or days off? What do you mean? Is there some way you can get a better job? Kayla sat blinking in disbelief. No, Miyako insisted. My job is very important. Everything would fall apart if we didn't have people like me doing my job. I'm trusted. What is your actual job? Kayla asked, unsure if she wanted to know the answer. Delivery manager, he said proudly, then lowered his voice. I decide which boxes fall off the delivery truck. Kayla immediately regretted asking and decided to change the subject. What's the next question on your list? Nelfrey, we're here, just barely made it in time. Kiryu, I just spotted target 3. I'm going for it. Enjoy, Kayla transmitted. He's all yours. Nelfrey, bitch, you're not leaving me down here all alone. Kiryu, I think you can handle Callie spotting without me. Callie spotting? Kayla mused, what are those 2 bitches up to now? Oh, fuck. I forgot, Kayla transmitted. They were only able to have 1 guest at a time. If she beat Kiryu up to the VIP suite, she'd just have to wait until the song ended. How long do I have? This one isn't on the list, he said. He sounded louder and clearer, or perhaps the music had gotten. The current song was ending in a protracted fade. Kayla began to panic. Her black tail was hanging outside the booth, over the border of the sound-dampening field. She'd gotten so distracted she hadn't even mentioned the music or its effect on her tail. There were only a few seconds left to act. I can't be here during this song. How fast can you run? Kayla said urgently as she grabbed onto the fur running over his shoulders and down his chest. Her tail refused to obey her will. With any luck the song would have a nice slow. Nope, drum roll with a heavy backbeat. I hate a steak roll. Kayla fell forward and moaned into the side of his chest as her stinger vibrated uncontrollably. His legs were both pinned against the booth to the right of her. She was kneeling on her brown tails, which were desperately squirming, trying to unravel themselves from around her calves and thighs. Her fingers tensed and relaxed with the passing of each pulse through the cartilage in her tail. Her right cheek was buried in his fur on the right side of his chest. She wished she could see his face. Between beats, Kayla released her grip on his fur, and pushed herself away from him, spreading her legs involuntarily as her twin tails rushed to uncoil themselves. Her black tail was unable to fully compensate for the sudden movement as Miyako's attempt to free his own legs sent her careening onto the floor. In that moment, Kayla wondered if she'd looked like the tentacle monster Cyan had joked about. The look in Miyako's eyes held far too many emotions to interpret as he held out his hand to her. I think it's safer if I stay here, Kayla whimpered as she dragged her black tail inside the metal inlay bordering the dampening field. Unfortunately, the infrasonic beat was lower than the frequency range covered by the suppression field. The vibration running through her tail hadn't reduced significantly. Miyako withdrew his hand and watched her as every muscle in her body convulsed to the sound of the song. He sat with both feet lightly on the floor and started tapping his clawed toes along with the beat. His eyes went wide. It's the music, isn't it? Her eyes refused to focus well enough to read the messages from her chat group, but she could tell Syntholo was now participating. She might be able to enjoy the beat and ride it. If she just stopped trying to fight the sensation. The last song had been pleasant, calming, and arousing until it drew to an end, but it had been a ballad. This was a very different kind of song. Kayla sucked in her lip and clamped her mouth shut as she nodded while fighting back tears. Kayla turned to her side, leaning against the front of the booth, with her eyes sealed shut. She opened her mouth, panting softly, her jaw quivering. She felt something, warm, soft, and fuzzy slide down onto the floor next to her. She opened her eyes just enough to verify it was Miyako, sitting on the floor with her. She opened her mouth to thank him, but a shuddering gasp was all that escaped her lips. She leaned into him as he rested his hand on her shoulder. She quivered and panted softly, desperately trying not to give in to the sensations flowing through her tail. Miyako drew her into a comforting embrace. Is there anything I can do to help? He said softly. Kayla pushed back, grabbed his wrist and placed her black tail in his hand so he could feel the vibrations flowing through it. By the end of the second beat, seeing how the rest of her body was responding in tandem, he grabbed her black tail in both hands and held it in a death grip. Kayla sighed with relief as the harshness subsided. She was finally able to relax and enjoy what remained of the sensation. The amount of gratitude she felt was only surpassed by her loathing for the band Estacral. Killing every last one of them and destroying every last copy of their music would have made it onto her to-do list if it wasn't so impractical. Miyako couldn't release Kayla's tail without her discomfort returning. However, he'd shown her a way to deal with it herself until she could get an appropriate tail wrap. She leaned against him, shivering as she waited for her overstimulated nerves to calm. Kayla glanced at the messages she'd missed. Syntholo had finished the negotiations with the scrappers and was on his way to Nelfree and Kiryu's position. I need a tail wrap to absorb vibrations, Kayla transmitted. Nelfree, I may have a resolution as long as Syntholo is willing to defend my virtue. Syntholo, always. Kayla bit her lower lip. Kiryu was pursuing her second pairing of the evening. Sin and Nelfree would be great together, and Kayla was trapped on the floor trying to decide. What? The pressure on her tail was smoothing out the vibration, but it was clear that as the song reached its climax, so would she. She could either reach that precipice alone or with a little intervention. Miyako was nice, sweet, and there. Like braiding leather, Kayla tightly wound her twin brown tails around her black tail until they reached his hands. I can take over, she said as she guided him to ease his grip and slide his hands down her tail as the other two had completed taking their position. Thank you, Kayla said softly, because of what this music does to my tail. By the time the song is over, I'm going to. Miyako's lower jaw quivered as she began petting his fur in long, slow strokes. When Terran girls pet me, I know, Kayla blushed, the music's going to get me off anyway, do you want to help? He soundlessly mouthed the word yes. Kayla rolled her body against his, pushing his back against the front of the booth.